Hola todos! So, before the year 13s finished their exams a few months ago, I asked them what advice they have for themselves at the start of year 13, for Spanish paper 1 in particular. There's 45 responses, so I'm going to go through them all and dish out some advice for paper 1 and also for papers 2 and 3 at the end of the video. Vamos! Okay, so here we go. The question is, in terms of revision, what are things you're glad that you did and things you wished you did, and what advice do you have for the current year 12s or going into sort of year 13? So we're going to go through them all. Firstly, it says, I think my grammar practice was crucial as I was lacking confidence throughout the whole of year 12 and a bit of year 13. But I put in a decent amount of time into it and practicing conjugation and learning key irregulars, and I think it helped to an extent. Fair enough. So the first tip there is learning key irregular verbs, right? Learning if it lets me type there, learning key irregular verbs, and I've got a video about irregular verbs for GCSE and for A-level. I'll put the picture of the thumbnail on the screen. But that's your big tip. I agree. Go through, especially different tenses as well. The preterite, the imperfect, the perfect tenses, the future tense. Go through those so irregular verbs, different tenses, including the stem changes like jugar and poder. Just learn the sort of tricks and the patterns. For example, sentir is stem changing in quite a few tenses. We say siente. He or she feels, siente, for example, se siente, being reflexive. But that's going to be the first tip there. Go through grammar, specifically key irregular verbs. Okay, this is a bit long. However, I did every single past paper from 2024 to 2018. Year 12s could add to that and do 2025 now. And then I found all of the most common words and made a 200 to 300 word Quizlet. And honestly, so many of those words came up. I was laughing. Also, grammar is boring. No one wants to do it. But you must understand every single text to the grammar, to the point you can do it instantly. Grammar is your friend. I agree. Exam technique as well. And the papers are predictable. Yeah, I agree. Lots of really good things there. So past papers, as the student has said, every single year, sort of in a row, just bang them all out sort of thing. I would also add to that and say do LXL papers as well. Most of you here are going to be AQA students because it's just the more common exam board. So have a look at EdXL paper ones for Spanish. They also do A-level Spanish, and you can look at all the past papers. There's lots of them for you to do. And your AS papers as well. If you're going into year 13, make sure you've done all of the AS paper ones for both exam boards, like over summer and at the start of year 13, so past papers. In terms of vocabulary, that's a really good point. So we've got the vocab in the textbook, for example. You've got the vocab in the textbook that you should know and that you will learn over time if you use Anki and stuff like that to learn the vocab. That's a really good thing. But on top of that, beyond that, we've got vocab that they will use in the past papers that isn't in the textbook, because at A-level, they can put sort of any words in the paper. So taking on board what the student has said, learn that sort of beyond, I'm going to call it beyond vocabulary, past the textbook, past what you might see in class, but things from like news websites, from past papers, from like Spanish fiction books and things like that, sort of beyond vocabulary. Yeah, that's a really good tip there. On Quizlet, on Anki, I personally prefer Anki, but Quizlet also does the same sort of job. Okay, moving on. Moving on. So I'm glad the night before I went through irregular verbs and gap fills. Wish I'd looked more on the difference between se and le. So gap fill questions, I've got a whole video on that actually, but practice different types of questions. I'm going to put in there practice, like exam technique really, as the student above as well said, specifically like gap fill questions. In terms of se and le, those are your pronouns, right? You've got your direct, you've got your indirect, what else? You've got your reflexive, I'm probably missing something as well, but you've got different types of pronouns. Se has three meanings. Se could be used in the passive voice. It could be used as a reflexive pronoun, for example, se siente, or it can be used as an indirect object when we say, if I can type and say at the same time, for example, we say like se lo dio, he or she gave it to him or her. Instead of saying le lo dio, we say se lo dio. So that's where se can also be used as that pronoun there. So just go through the meaning, the uses of se, because it's quite a common word. It's a very small word, but it's very common. So as the student said there, se and le, go through those pronouns. They're really good, especially for the summary question as well, I think. Pronouns are particularly important for the summary questions. Okay, the next one says, practicing summaries because they were my downfall. Yeah, I agree. So summary questions, go through them, go through the mark scheme in particular, practice them because there's a lot of tricks in them in terms of how the answer is laid out and how they want you to write out your answer. So go through summary questions. Okay, vocabulary, if I can just scroll there. Vocabulary, learn your vocab. I'm glad I learned most of it, but there are many moments I was regretting not going over it more. Perfect. Said it there from a student. Go through vocabulary. So start off with the textbook. The textbook vocab first. Again, Quizlet or Anki, either one works. You can just look at the physical list in the textbook. But I would say it's better to have some sort of app that monitors your progress and things like that versus just like paper flashcards or just looking at the list. I literally just did past paper questions on and vocabulary on Quizlet. Yep, we've spoken about those things. Glad I watched all your videos. Thank you. They help massively. Good. Definitely wish I did more practice questions. Yeah, go through past papers. Every year there's like more past papers. There's loads of them. For A level, specifically for AQA, you've got from 2018 onwards. That's when the specification started. So lots of past papers. Moosh, you already mentioned above. Join Astarspanish live and smash out past papers. Yeah, past papers. The live is in reference to a paid live session that I ran last year. I might do that again this year. We've still got ages to think about that. But good, thank you for that. Okay, wish I'd done vocab more often. So also my advice is constantly go over vocab. Yes, definitely, we've said this before. Okay, this is a bit longer. I'm glad that I took the time to understand and find out exactly how to answer each question so that I wouldn't waste time. But I wish I revised more topic vocabulary and grammar rules like object pronouns. For the current year 12s, I would really recommend starting to learn vocab as early as possible and learning a little each day so they're not cramming at the end. This is a really good point. You can start vocab as early as possible. If you're watching this and you're in year 12 or starting year 12, then start learning vocabulary at the start of year 12. Start building these habits from the start. But I assume most of you here are in year 13. So it's not late. You've still got plenty of time. Go through the year 12 words first and then the year 13 words from the textbook. But start as early as possible at the start of year 12 if you can. Okay, it's also good to learn the best way for themselves to approach the exam, as this can be different for everyone. This is a really good point. For example, I like starting the translation first. I agree with this. I would always start with the translation question first for paper one. Yeah, so as you practice exam papers and full exam papers in time conditions, find your own way of approaching the exam. There's about 10ish questions. It's up to you which order you do them in, completely up to you. So spend some time to work out which order works best for you. I would do the translation questions first, then the listening section, then the reading section. That's my personal way. I did it in the way I'd recommend doing it, but find your own way of approaching the exam. Okay, use your videos, good. I'm glad. Lots of vocab in past papers, how I revised. Yep, perfect. Lots of vocabulary, past papers, going through tricks. AQA in particular love these repetitive tricks. So you can just go through them and learn what tricks the examiners use to catch you out. For example, tricks like if I put in there synonym tricks, let me again type synonym tricks. For example, padecer and sufrir both mean to suffer, but padecer is often the verb they're going to use because you probably won't recognize it if you've not seen it before because it's not a cognate. So they love using sort of non-cognates, obviously in the exam, versus cognates, which makes it a bit easier because cognates look the same in Spanish and in English. Okay, revise grammar and read examiner reports, so especially for paper 2 actually. Yeah, I'm going to write that, especially paper 2. Read the examiner reports. They're there for all of your subjects and all the papers, but go through what are the common mistakes other students had made, and just almost the examiner comments when they mark the papers, they put together examiner reports, so go through them. Okay, glad to have binge watched your videos, practice loads of vocab and recurring phrases that come up every year. There's lots of them. For example, padecer and sufrir, every single year it comes up very often, so go through those common words and phrases. I would have immersed myself more in the language to pick up on vocabulary that you don't learn from the textbook. For example, by watching Spanish TV and reading more articles. No one's mentioned this yet, but the idea of comprehension or like almost Spanish immersion, if I write in that Spanish immersion, or the idea of comprehensible input, so learning a language not through textbooks and through exercises, but just through listening and watching. If I can spell comprehensible input. That's not how you spell it, but that's fine. Go through movies. Yeah, I would say movies, songs, podcasts, articles, and particularly news when you get to year 13. There's a lot of those for immigration and racism topics that come up in the news quite often. So go through vocabulary for those topics. Using articles, podcasts, things like BBC News. There's lots of apps and stuff that you can use nowadays to do that. Doing the last minute study session, yep, I ran one last year, so that's what that is in reference to. The bank of key verbs. There's lots of verbs that they repeat, so go through those verbs and doing past papers, including LXL ones, because LXL ones are sometimes a little bit harder, I found. So there we go. Past papers in Quizlet, good. I spent time doing past papers, looking over tenses, vocabulary, it always pays off. The subjunctive no one's mentioned yet, which is a really good point actually, so thank you for mentioning that. The subjunctive, go through the uses, how to spot it. Again, especially for paper 2 and the speaking exam, you need to use a subjunctive to get marks for the grammar. But things like in the translation as well, they will put the subjunctive in there somewhere. So just go through the subjunctive, yeah, endings, how to use it, how to conjugate it, all sorts, and how to translate it as well. but you will never get full marks in the exam, especially for the translation section. So you will end up making mistakes like every now and again. Listen to Spanish media, vocabulary flashcards. Again, yep, good. Spending so long on vocabulary, irregular verbs, and being confident on tenses. We're going to write in there as well. Most of you will be, but for those of you who aren't, just be confident on your tenses, on your endings, the basics of preterite, present tense, imperfect tense, future tense, subjunctive, and just go through the tenses. Advice to year 12 is if your teacher isn't spending time on grammar, teach it to yourself sooner rather than later. Not all of your teachers will be the same sort of good teacher. Hopefully, I hope you've got a good teacher, but if not, yeah, teach grammar to yourself. Grammar is one of those things, once you learn it, hopefully you don't forget it. So at the start of year 13, get through your grammar and then don't forget it as you go towards sort of exam season. So yeah, just as the student above said, go through tenses and grammar. Good. Again, live stream is reference to that paid session. I'm glad I learned how to do summaries properly. I actually learned how to do them properly through your video. Yes, I might end up remaking that video, but go through the summary questions. Again, the exam technique for those summary questions. You get a listening summary and a reading summary. They're both 12 marks each. So a big chunk of the paper, 24% to 24 marks of the paper. So definitely a big chunk. And in total, they form 12% of your final grade. The way the grades work for Spanish in particular, 50% of the grade comes from paper one, so that 100 marks is doubled. So the raw mark is 100, but the paper itself is out of 200 when they add it all up at the end. Paper two, they leave untouched, and paper three, they double the mark by two. So the 60 marks becomes 120 marks. So you've got 200 for paper one, 80 for paper two, and 120 for paper three, which gives you 400 in total. So the summary question becomes both of those together, 12% of your final grade. Okay, translations, practicing translations, going through vocabulary and verb endings. Yeah, so in this case, a stem changing, go through those sorts of verbs. Past papers, mark schemes, yep. I've got quite a few videos on A level. I'm going to be doing more for paper one in particular. I've got a recent gapful one that I did at the end of last exam season. I'll put the thumbnail for that on the screen. But practicing lots of papers with my videos or without my videos. Time management is a good point. It's quite a long paper, obviously. It's 2.5 hours. So you should not be running out of time, but practice time management. How much time you spend in each section is the point where you decide, actually, I finished this section, or maybe I haven't finished yet. When do I move on? When do I say that time is enough and I need to move on, to not waste all of my time, for example, on listening or reading or on translation? So go through time management for the paper. It's quite obviously a chunky big paper, isn't it? Where am I? Yeah, so Anki, vocabulary, yeah, translations, good. Past papers, tenses, gap fill work, and this test resource, I believe, is referencing the video that I put up a few seconds ago. Every past paper, good. Vocabulary, again, lots of repetition here, but vocab and grammar, you guys get the gist. I'm going to try and go through the rest of it a little bit quicker. So vocab, Anki vocab, Quizlet. I've got decks for Quizlet as well as on Anki. Grammar, subjunctive triggers as well. So basic sort of sentence starters that lead to the present subjunctive with the imperfect subjunctive. Past papers, Spanish podcast, barely revised. There's always some of those people. Past papers, yeah. For the summary questions, we're changing from the first person, for example, I talk, to the third person, he or she talks. That's what we're doing in that summary in the summary questions for AQA especially. So go through again pronouns and conjugations of verbs. Casa Cerrado y la Rosa de Guadalupe. I'm not sure what those are, but maybe movies or series, anime. Yeah, reading books in Spanish. This is an interesting point here. So I'm glad I didn't spend too much time learning all the vocab for each topic. I could work out meanings from context. This is true. Someone obviously thinks this, and it could work. It could be true. Obviously, if you've got time ahead of the exam, and you're at the start of year 13, revise. It's good to revise. But if you get stuck, you can use context to work out the meanings of certain words. As always. This is specific here. So I'm so glad that I noted down any unfamiliar words when doing past papers and translations. A lot of them came up again from time to time. So being able to recognize those words made the whole exam so much better. When I saw hacer in capi in the translation, I almost jumped out my seat from joy. This was in the 2025 paper. That word means emphasis, to put emphasis on something, to do emphasis almost. So, yep. vocabulary and specific words that isn't in your textbook. This word is not in your textbook as far as I'm aware. It's a bit of a random word, but it's come up in papers before. Past papers, Quizlet. Yep. Niche grammar like commands is a good one. So commands and imperatives in Spanish, imperatives and commands. You don't talk about them a lot, but go through how to form those in case it came up in the translation, for example. Okay. Yep. Father third, I talked about that sort of meaning to suffer. Um, Words are a good one, and words before numbers. For example, if they ask you a question about like how many people or something like that, they'll say something like casi mil. For example, like almost 1,000, casi mil. It's not good enough to just say thousand. We'd have to say almost 1,000. So they're quite specific at A level. So go through those words like casi, which means almost. Um, in particular, speaking and writing, so people maybe don't revise this paper as much. You're going to have this paper when you come back after half term, is what it was like this year, sort of this last year anyway. So the speaking exams obviously takes a lot of focus because it happens earlier, but make sure you prioritize all three of your papers equally. And paper one is the most important by far. Okay, vocabulary, blah, blah, blah. Irregular verbs like poner, puso, and the preterite tense. Okay, and there's two left there. So we've got reading articles and trying to translate them, and then a vocab book in terms of keeping a list of vocabulary, like in some sort of notebook. Podcasts, some examples there. Duolingo's got one, Hoy en el País. You can change Netflix into Spanish. You can change the audio and the subtitles on Netflix. So you can have a mixture of maybe like audio in Spanish or subtitles in English, or audio in English and subtitles in Spanish. You can play around with it and do all different languages, of course. Le versus se, los coming up again, the pronouns and podcasts about the book and film. So in terms of paper two, if we talk about paper two now, you've got your essay paper, so you've got your book and your movie, or some people do two books. Make sure you go through quotes and the plot. But on top of that, you go through context, author context. You go through sort of historical context, especially if it was set like a little bit further back in history. You go through audience impact and the impact of that book or movie on society, on the audience. Director techniques and literary techniques, things like stage directions, especially, for example, in Volver, you've got your use of color, use of sound, etc. And practice lots of essays in class and outside of class. Do lots of essays in exam conditions. If you do a subject like English or history, you'll be used to sort of essay writing. But if not, make sure you practice essay writing as a skill. And then lastly, for advice for paper three or speaking paper, you've got your photo card, which is 25 marks, and your IRP, which is 35 marks. I'll be doing a separate IRP video at some point soon in terms of IRP tips. But for paper three, what advice would I give? For the photo card, know all the topics really well. Same for the IRP, know the IRP really well, your topic really well. Practice speaking a lot, which seems silly or seems obvious, but practice with native people, native speakers in particular. Go through, like if you've got a speaking assistant in school, for example, like a parent or teacher who helps you practice speaking, take that time to practice a lot. Just be confident talking about your opinions. A lot of you will have opinions that you can talk about in English about those topics, but when you say in Spanish, you struggle trying to communicate your ideas in Spanish. So communication is really important. So just practice speaking a lot. Is my main tip for the speaking exam. Okay, and that's pretty much going to be it for this video. If you want tutoring for Spanish, please head to astarlanguages.com/tutoring. Vale, adios.